delegates.
Okay, so it's a pleasure to have here with us Smillie. She is at the moment from the good part of the country, Scotland. You know, Brexit, Scotland. Okay. Just a bit of story about Jenny. She got her PhD in Cambridge, working on BSM and extra dimension. She moved around the UK. She went in Durham first and then UCL. And arrived in Edinburgh after UCL. And she was a postdoc, awarded a Royal Society Fellowship, and became permanent. And now we have a star here since she just recently was awarded an ERC. So, notwithstanding the fact that we have Brexit, we have a winner here from Europe. Today she's going to talk about what we can expect on LHC and what we're going to see really, whether we're going to see anything new. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much. This is actually my first time in Plymouth on any business, so it's a pleasure to be here and to find a new bit of the country, while it's still easy for me to cross the border and come down here. So as Antonio said, I'm going to be talking about sort of colliders, in particular jet production at high energy colliders. The picture here was really to give you just one example of the type of event I'll be discussing, where the dark cones coming out of the centre here represent many jets of coloured particles with large transverse momentum. It's not something that's spoken about a lot. We do talk a lot about sort of soft coloured particles, the underlying event mess, but actually in the current generation of colliders we have a problem with large transverse momentum too. I sort of struggled what to put for the high energy colliders bit of my title. I settled for that. The main motivation right now is for LHC Run I, but in doing so there's a lot of looking back actually to the Teratron and to LHC Run I, and a little bit of looking further forward still to possible future colliders as well. So, this clicks. Is this one?
No. It's just a focus toy now.
Switch buttons across.
I thought it was the arrow. I know I'm a theorist, but I thought I could do that. Thank you. So it's that way. There we go. Right. So a quick outline from the top. I'll start by motivating why there is a problem at all to be discussed here. We all spend a lot of time thinking about new physics, but actually there are still many problems with old physics. I'll then talk about the high energy limit. I put improved in brackets because it won't be a standard treatment of the high energy limit, but a slightly modified version that allows us to make some progress, which will lead me to high energy jets. They are both an item, you know, what you produce in your collision, but it's also the name of the theoretical framework I've been developing with my collaborator Jeppe Andersen, and all of that really is leading up to comparisons to data and some recent developments. So the title slide picture there, I said it had a lot of particles with a lot of transverse momentum. In particular, it had 12 jets with transverse momentum above 50 GeV. And I wanted to emphasise this right at the start, because throughout the talk I will quite often talk about multiple jets or many jets. And in some contexts that is used to mean 3 jets instead of 2. And that is not what I mean here. I do mean many. I won't always mean 12, but I can mean quite a large number. And this just shows that there is the possibility to produce these. A natural corollary of the high energy at the LHC Run II and even at Run I, we talk all the time about being able to produce new heavy particles, but you can also produce many more lighter particles, and will do. And 50 GeV is just to give you a rough idea of the energy scale, that I'm not talking about the sort of couple of GeV, very soft stuff in this particular talk. In fact, the harder, in some senses, you make that, the easier it is for our descriptions. Obviously, to do a theoretical prediction for an event like this is a very difficult thing to do. As soon as you have a large number of particles, your calculation is hard. Partly because just of the combinatorics. All the momenta involved, if you want to integrate that overall phase space, becomes a bit of a mess. But also because there are very many different scales within this process. You have the total centre of mass energy of the actual collision, some fraction of the 13 TeV, not the full lot, but in this case quite a lot, probably 8 or 9. The transverse momentum of each jet, around 50 GeV in this case. You can take invariant masses of different jets which will sit somewhere in between. And each of those means that the answer to your calculation can depend on many variables. And if you have lots of scales which vary dramatically, you almost always generate logs. And you will see exactly in this case that you do, and logs of large ratios are a big problem for theoretical descriptions in general. So that's just the situation to begin with these events. We actually frequently make life much harder for ourselves because we select regions of phase space where the problem is enhanced for good reasons, but it makes life very difficult. One example is Higgs boson analysis. If you want to study the CP structure through Higgs plus dijets, then typically you look for collisions where there's a Higgs boson sitting perpendicular to the beam, and you have a couple of jets which are almost parallel to the beam axis, so they sort of come in and deflected just a very little bit. If you do that, you have large rapidity between your jets, and that enhances jet production. So in using those cuts to select events of signal and suppressed background, you actually destroy your theoretical description in some ways. Also, searches for new physics do a similar thing, because you're typically looking for high energy events. If you want to see if your two jets could have been produced from some new heavy coloured particle, then you're looking at large values of invariant mass, and again that enhances jet production. And this has been very measured in experiments for a long time, and I'll show some plots later where you see the systematic increase. So, to give some sort of recap on how we've developed our description of QCD at colliders, there was a very big breakthrough from the fixed order side in the sort of late 2000s, early 2010s, when the bottleneck for next to leading order calculations was finally solved. Before that, you were waiting a couple of years for every process to be calculated to next to leading order, but after the power of using analyticity was understood, there was a huge explosion. In particular, the Black Hat collaboration started ticking off, 2, 3, 4, 5 jets every couple of months. They did that for a number of processes, and GoSam and NJet currently hold records in a few other processes using that. And the idea was that in going from the Tevatron, where leading order actually was really accurate enough, in most cases, if you moved to next to leading order as standard, then you would stabilise your descriptions and deal with the extra energy. But the extra power of alpha S that you now include in your calculation can be easily compensated by the large phase space that's available and the large logs that come with the alpha S. And both of these effects are enhanced at Run 2 and at a possible future collider, where you keep ramping up your centre of mass energy. There are various ways to look for that. One sort of experimental way of measuring it is to look at the relative size of the cross-section for an inclusive n+1 jet process to an n-jet process, and these numbers are not small. If you're thinking of your alpha S cubed correction as a small one, you would want to see that as a fraction of percent or 5%. Generically, across lots of different processes, it's more like 20%. If you apply selection criteria like the ones used for Higgs plus jets, the VBF cuts, it rises to 0.3. And what that means is that every time you ask for events with, say, at least 2 jets, for every 3 events that you measure, one of them will have at least 1 extra jet. And that is a big problem from a perturbative expansion point of view. And it's just a symptom of the stability of NLO failing. And I put in difficult regions of phase space. The problem we have is that as you increase S, what you define as the difficult region of phase space becomes larger. It becomes a much larger fraction of the phase space itself. One plot just to show that is a very early one. This is back from 2010 data of some of the first analyses of Run 1 data at the LHC. And the x-axis here is a rapidity separation. So the separation in the z coordinate of your outer jets. So they looked at examples with at least 2 jets, and they looked at the span from the most forward to the most backward jet. That's the x-axis, and the y-axis is the average number of jets in addition to those 2. Now, all of these lines start at 0. They have been spaced up so you can see the separation. We don't have 12. But for a fairly modest rapidity separation of 3, that's just jets at plus or minus 1.5, this average in all the lines starts to creep above 1. And that means that above that point, then you will have more than 1 extra jet, basically, in every event. And a pure next leading order calculation can never describe that. It just has 1 extra power of alpha s, 1 extra coloured particle. And the theory lines on this plot are all order, the different implementations, but they actually contain all orders of alpha s. But the fact that we need all order corrections in QCD is also not so much of a surprise. That is something that we have been doing since the 1980s. At that point, Pythia and Herwig were developed, which are part-on-shower programs, when it was understood that there were terms which were enhanced at small invariant mass between your particles. In practice, that means that you either have a very low transverse momentum or that they're almost collinear. In pictures, if you do a matrix element fixed order calculation, you think of every jet basically as being just a single coloured particle as a straight line, and when you add a part-on shower to it, it adds extra gluons and splittings and so on. So it gives you the structure of the jet, which is much closer to what is actually seen. It was known that these effects could be very large and important, and it's been entirely standard to describe these as part-on showers for 30 years now. And even further, we're now largely automated with next to leading order matrix elements as your starting point. That took a bit of working out, but 10 years or so ago there were a couple of suggestions of how to do it, and there's now 2 main tools where it's really automated. You can say, here's my Lagrangian, and it will produce next to leading order events for you showered.
Could I just ask about so you've shown us the kind of pass-on level.
Yeah.
And is there still some invocation of a hadron-parton duality or something that's underlying how you go from this to a jet?
Yes, exactly. There's still another step missing after all
right.
this that I've not even touched on yet, which is the hadronization, which is the process where you take these and make them colour singlet objects and understand the QCD, which is yet another step in the description.
And again, just so what are you saying in the sense like if you've got you think you've got 2 jets, but then at some stage you realise actually one of those jets is actually itself 2 or 3 jets. Is that? I'm trying to think of the picture of what's.
Yeah, well, yes, exactly. Everything that you see, actually, if we go...
you'll have a big jet.
Yeah.
So
if you go right back to this picture here, it's maybe easiest to see. What I would call a jet, what's compared to my single coloured particle in the calculation, is the axis of one of these cones. But you can see looking inside the cone that it consists of a lot of coloured particles. Yeah. And it really is. I mean, you never see just a single line in a jet. And it comes from all these extra...
resolution thing that as you resolve more of the jet structure, you're seeing it's actually more than one jet.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's actually a very powerful technique, which is used these days to distinguish boosted objects and things like that, for example. But here, what we're going to concentrate most on is getting the first bit right, actually getting this right, and then adding all the extra stuff. Because these descriptions are enormously powerful. I didn't expect to be in a position where this was automated by now. But ultimately a part-on shower is designed to do soft and collinear, and that's what it's done. This is an old plot, but I couldn't find a better one when I was looking for one. But it illustrates the point kind of nicely. This is W plus jets events inclusive measured in Atlas, where each bin is the cross-section for at least the number of jets shown. And the black points are the data points. And the crosses here are what you get with a pure part-on shower. And you can see how dramatically they drop off below. And Sherpa has a few extra matrix elements, but they also drop off as you get to larger numbers. And it's specifically because here you're asking for a prediction for something it is not designed to do. It's not designed to produce an extra 3 high transverse momentum particles for you. It's designed to produce a lot of soft stuff and an occasional collinear splitting. You can postpone the problem a little bit by using smart merging approaches. There's lots of ones with lots of acronyms. And Simon Pletzer has his own, which doesn't have a name. But the fundamental problem is the same one, that after the point you're relying on a partron shower, then you're not describing hard jet production. And all they do is actually postpone the problem slightly further to the right. A clear example of that, this can be seen in this plot from Atlas. Again, this is a W plus 2 jet plot. And we'll come back to discussing the pink line right at the end, because that's what the rest of the talk is going to be about. But the point of this plot is to say that when you're not doing anything particularly dangerous, it doesn't sound dangerous. You're looking for a W boson plus at least 2 jets. These are fairly inclusive cuts. You have to have a minimum PT. You have to have a maximum rapidity. And then you just plot what you get against the invariant mass. A plot like this is where you would be bump hunting, for example. And the top line there is a pure next to leading order calculation. These are, AlpGen is a sort of merged leading order thing. And Sherpa and MEPS at NLO are next leading order merged with other tree level and partron shower things. And you can see clearly that at quite modest values, they all not only veer away from the data, they also veer away from each other. And that is the clear signal that your whole approach actually has broken down. It's not that there's something missing that you haven't included or that you're overcounting. You have hit an instability.
So just to understand,
yeah.
The gray is the data and is the same in the 4 plots.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, okay.
And it corresponds to the ratio to the data from these bins here, where that's a log plot, so you can hide a lot on the actual plot. In the ratio, you can see things going worse. And it's particularly surprising for me, actually, because on paper, the most sophisticated of these predictions is actually that one, the red hashed one. And it is actually the worst in describing the data. So you think you've been really smart and put everything in, but as I say, the problem is actually you've hit the instability and hit it quicker in that case.
Can I just ask you,
Yeah, of course.
going back to, because you, as you said, there's lots of logs going on here. This is causing a lot of problems. But
Yeah.
there's, as you said, there's collinear and there's soft logs.
Yes.
Is it the collinear ones that are causing the kind of problem, or is the soft is also?
No, in this case, actually, these two descriptions here describe both the soft and the collinear logs perfectly. And it's different logs entirely, which are the problem. It's the logs that you get from hard wide-angle radiation instead, which is something that we haven't considered before. It's the opposite limit to the partron shower, where you're actually worried about S becoming large instead of small. If you have log of a ratio, then you have a problem both if that ratio becomes very small and very big. And it's the very big bit that we could neglect until now, but can't. I'll show later on, I've got equations with it. In fact, here, I didn't realise it was coming straight away. So the message of this is that there is an instability that we need to address, and one way to do that is to apply an all-order approach to the hard wide-angle radiation, the opposite of the shower. Before I went on to describe how we do that, I wanted to define actually which all-order I meant. So the left-hand side here is the matrix element for 2-jet production, by which I mean the thing left to be integrated over 2 partrons, which for the first line is completely unambiguous. That is just what it is. If you write down the Feynman rules for every contributing process, add it all up, then and write the expansion in S over T. So you've got 2 particles, you've got 3 Mandel-Standard variables, only 2 are independent. We pick S and T. Then your series looks like this. The dominant behaviour goes like S squared. You divide by your flux factor and that cancels when you integrate. But then, to correct this at higher orders in perturbation theory, then you start adding real emission diagrams and virtual correction diagrams. And what you find is if it's, say, a 2 to 3 matrix element, and you integrate over the extra part on, then you get an extra log that comes with your s squared over t squared. And if it's a virtual correction, then if you perform the loop integration, you get a log from the loop, and it's a log in s over t. So your series looks like this. Basically, every time you add an alpha s, you add an extra integration, and you get back another log. So if you calculate to leading order, you calculate just your first line. That's fairly textbook stuff. Then if you want next to leading order, you go to your next line, and you're very pleased with yourself because you've now described all these contributions in a sort of concise way. But the problem is you've lost your argument that this is a small correction to that one if the log can be large. And the S that's sitting in your log is the protonic centre of mass energy. So as we have continued to ramp up the LHC centre of mass energy, then we've actually continued to ramp up this log. And that means if you take the ratio of this term to that term, it's alpha S times log. And although your alpha S is small, your log is not. So you can't neglect this term anymore in the way that we've done before. You can argue that you can neglect this term, because the ratio of those ones is an alpha S, and that's fine. But the leading logs are our problem here. And so in the rest of the talk, I will often refer to leading logarithmic accuracy, and by that I mean getting the A coefficients correct. The coefficients of the leading powers of the s squared over t squared and the logs, which for this variable go like alpha s to the k log to the k minus 2. In fact, when we build our final description, we go very slightly further and put the b2 back in. It doesn't change the formal accuracy in terms of leading logs, but you would be unsatisfied to have built a description that isn't even tree-level accurate. And that is something that can be solved. So that's the aim of what we're doing. Now, going from a fixed order to all order is quite a big step to take. And of course, it's not a step that we can actually solve completely. If we could, you wouldn't need perturbation theory, you would just have solved your entire system. And there are two different features of QCD which actually allow us to be able to do it at all. The first is that the dominant momentum configurations in the high energy limit, and the high energy limit is what allows us to extract just those leading terms, are very well defined. And in practice, it means that for a given initial state and a given number of outgoing particles, there is only one that will contribute. So where, if you're doing a tree-level calculation of the real contribution, for example, you would have to worry about the n factorial complexity of your phase space, it's completely solved here because it is 1 for any n. The prescription is that the dominant momentum configuration is the one which would allow the maximum number of t-channel gluon exchanges if you draw your incoming states like this and your final states ordered in rapidity. And in practice means that the outgoing most backward particle has to be the same as that one, even up to the same flavour of quark, not just a quark. The outgoing most forward one has to be a gluon in this case, and everything in between has to be a gluon. If you exchange two gluons for, say, quark-antiquark here, then you would get a quark-antiquark line there, and you would replace one of these gluons with a quark, and you lose a factor of s. It's Reggie theory that the matrix element squared goes like s to twice the spin of the t-channel particle. So if you go from gluon to quark, you lose a power of s. So there are some processes actually which don't appear at all. It's not possible to do that, and for then there's the ones that is possible and you can entirely construct this. The second feature which allows us to actually do this in a numerically efficient way is that when you take the high energy limit, the amplitudes factorise really nicely into independent pieces. I've stated the limit explicitly there. Actually, one way to write it is that the rapidity difference between any two outgoing particles goes to infinity, while the transverse momentum remains relatively the same size. That's entirely equivalent to the invariant mass between any two particles going to infinity. And actually is what gives you the idea of it being wide angle. when you do that, the approximations it allows you to make in an amplitude are such that every amplitude can be written like this, where you have a sort of a block here, which depends only on the incoming momentum and the outgoing momentum there. You have another block here which only knows about this end and about nothing else. And then you have all these vertices which, in principle, also don't know anything about any other particle, and certainly don't know anything about each other. So then if I want to go from 6 extra gluons to 20 extra gluons, I just add a scalar factor for each one, basically. So the matrix element is slightly bigger, but it's in no way more conceptually complex. You're not even doing contractions or anything, it's just scalar multiplication for each of these particles. So that's excellent, because without that you couldn't do an efficient numerical generation. And it also applies to loop diagrams. And there's really no choice. It's nice that you can get loop diagrams like this in a nicely factorised way that can be sort of separated off. But what we're going to do is sum over the number of extra emissions, integrate overall phase space, and then, like in any calculation, if you allow a momentum emission to go to 0, you get an infrared singularity, and you have to cancel it with the equivalent loop. And so they actually slot together nicely like that. It all sounds quite unfamiliar, I think, so I wanted to give a few examples to show you that actually these pieces are more familiar than they perhaps sound. The way that we can derive them is also very straightforward. Precisely because I said these bits don't depend on each other, you can pick the simplest process which contains the bit you want to derive it.
You're only looking, sorry, just bring that back to the
Yeah.
picture. You're only looking at emissions, the kind of blue bits there, aren't you? You're not looking at absorption processes. It's just a statement you made about infrared worried me.
Oh, I see.
Because the collinear ones, you know, summing over outgoing states doesn't cancel the virtual. You know, you've got the Leonardo theorem.
Yeah, in the
You've got
expressions,
initial states as well.
in the expressions here, we actually have no collinear singularity. The matrix element we write down doesn't diverge.
Just soft.
It's because it's derived in this limit here where you pull them apart. So you sort of explicitly assume they cannot be collinear in the construction. And in fact, something we did to improve it introduced a collinear problem we had to solve later on. So the simplest one of these, if we start with 2 quarks, you want to know, basically, I want to know what one of these pieces is for an incoming quark, and I said that meant the outgoing one had to be the same quark. The simplest process would be quark, quark to quark, quark, 2 different flavours, so there's no interference. Then there's one diagram, Feynman diagram, it's shown here, and it automatically has a T-channel gluon, as we were discussing for momentum configurations. And if you write down the Feynman rules, you get exactly this. Now, I've already implicitly actually summed over spins, so there should be a sum over spins sitting there. But the function is the same. Each one of these currents is a U bar gamma mu U. It's a vector current. They contract with each other. You have your T-channel pole. If you do the algebra, it doesn't take very long. And you get an expression like that once you have summed over all your holistic configurations. The problem with this expression is that it's not in a particularly appealing form. It's not very nicely separated. S squared plus U squared is a bit awkward. And but in the past, the way this was treated was that people said, oh well, in the high energy limit, S goes to infinity, T remains fixed. So S goes to minus U, because the sum of your amount of standard variance is 0. So therefore S squared and U squared is the same thing, and you get 2S squared over T squared. And in the high energy limit, that is entirely correct statement. That is exactly what you will write down. But you will get your leading order process wrong, because there is a difference between S and U. And it was done precisely so up to a factor of S that you can extract out the front, you can write something nice which factorizes, and where you sort of separate the dependence on these parts of the chain. But in doing so, what you're doing is solving a problem you created yourself. If you don't contract these currents in the first place, you already have a bit that depends on one end of the chain, multiplying a bit that depends on the other end of the chain. The Feynman rules give you that already. And T you can write in terms of either, so we would do that symmetrically. So that was actually why we write that block there as a current, when we realised that you can keep leading order accuracy just by moving to vectors instead of scalars. What you've done is use the extra degree of freedom in your vector to describe your expression exactly. So that's very nice, but it's also the simplest possible QCD process that you could think of. So it's maybe not so surprising we could do something nice with it. What was much more surprising was that we showed you can do the same thing for incoming gluons. Now for quark gluon to quark gluon there are 3 Feynman diagrams to start with, and we showed that actually when you write these down and calculate, without taking any approximation whatsoever, the exact result is what's shown there. And not only does it only have an explicit T-channel pole left, despite starting with the 3 contributions here, it's also a simple scalar factor multiplying the quark-quark process. Now, it was known in the high energy limit that you could fairly effectively model incoming gluons as incoming quarks with altered colour factors. It was not known that at tree level with no approximation, the same thing is actually true. And the matrix element is exactly the same form. Up to this strange looking factor here, which we called the colour acceleration multiplier, because this bit is colour and this bit's acceleration. It's a strange looking factor because it mixes colour factors and momenta, but nonetheless, it's a nice scalar object multiplying the quark-quark to quark-quark matrix element. And this is how we treat our gluons actually, as currents with an altered factor like that.
The quark masses are exactly zero.
Yes, yeah, in this case.
Everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah, no, everything is assumed. I have a master's student doing something with top quarks just now, but for here, everything is massless. And so this justified actually our approximation of treating gluons like quarks.
The P minuses are...
Sorry, these are light cone coordinates, so they are energy plus or minus pz. So that's how we get the outer bits. The last bits in that skeleton I showed are the vertices, and the simplest process with an extra gluon is quark-quark to quark-gluon-quark. There are 5 Feynman diagrams for that. It's these 5 here. So of the T-channel gluon and then 1 each of a quark leg. To make progress here, you do have to do a small amount of approximating, but using some of the high energy limit approximations, you can find that matrix element appears exactly as the contraction of these 2 currents with the colour factor of this diagram here. And that it leads to confusion because people often think you've taken only that diagram, which you cannot do because it is not a gauge invariant thing to do. But the colour factors look as if they do, so we tend to write it like that because the colour factor is what you would get from that diagram. These, you'll notice, have become zigzag now because they're not straightforward gluons because you have added these extra coefficients in. The vertex itself is a kind of messy, ugly looking expression that you can see here, but you can show explicitly that it's gauge invariant in all of phase space. This sounds like a sort of trivial requirement because of course we want things to be gauge invariant. But in a lot of the original BFKL and high energy limit work, actually it was only gauge invariant in the high energy limit. And the whole point of this is we want to apply it to practical collider situations. And you don't have infinite energy. It might be large, it's not infinite. So we need to be gauge invariant everywhere. And this expression is. And it's only as complicated as it is because we wanted to put back in the fact that PA and P1 are different momenta. And we added all this symmetrization by hand. In the strict limits, you can't distinguish PA and P1 actually. So you just lose the factors of 2 and you get these terms, and 2 of these terms become the same as well. But like with our approach to using currents instead of scalars, we wanted to keep as much as possible of the underlying physics and chose to do it then in this way. So it seems like quite a lot of approximation. It's a strange thing to do to a tree level amplitude. So I wanted to show a few plots that actually it does work. These are plots for 2 to 4 partons, and the full blue line here is the matrix element. The red line is our approximation to it. So here we've got approximated currents because it's now 2 to 4, plus 2 of these extra vertices. And we track the shape of the matrix element here very well. To sort of emphasize why it's important, in previous high energy descriptions, people took the limiting value here to be valid through the whole plot. And you can see that's quite a big problem here. More so because in this slice of phase space, the outer partons were at plus or minus delta, and so at the LHC you can't measure further than here. And so to approximate the whole thing as that straight line is obviously going to give you something that is very wrong and far too large. So compared to that, the red line really is an impressive improvement. And this is an integrated version of the same thing.
Excuse me, so do you know the small quantity you've neglected, so that you have that you can control the amount of the approximation?
You could, for the 2 to 3 where you derived your emission, you can write down exactly what it is that is missing. When you go to sort of 2 to 8, to write it down explicitly would be much more difficult.
So it's not, in a sense, it's not that you do an expansion and you say
yeah, it's not a systematic expansion in a parameter or something.
It's not.
It's not. But it nonetheless is leading logarithmic accurate. We know we will always get there. And given the amount of approximation, it's impressive you get as close as you do, even away from the high energy limit, that you sort of managed to track the shape. The last bit we need, I mentioned already a bit, is the virtual corrections. For that, we use a well-known result, the Lipitov-Ansatz, which tells you that what you might draw as a t-channel gluon with a 1 over t, instead you get the leading log contribution of all the virtual corrections by multiplying by this exponential, which has a rapidity difference here. High energy and rapidity differences are always interlinked. And the alpha hat parameter here is given by this integral, which is just a bubble integral. And that actually stems from the fact that we tend to use light cone coordinates, and in the high energy limit you project out the light cone bits and you're left with the transverse degrees of freedom. So you only have 2 things to integrate over, and you get a 2-dimensional bubble in this case. And that has been proven to give you the leading logarithmic terms next to leading log. And furthermore been proven to give you exactly the poles from these epsilons that cancel the ones that arise from the real emissions becoming soft. We've shown that in a couple of our papers too. So that's been quite pictorial. Before I show you results, I wanted to show you the actual equations of how things look like when you put it all together. Our work mainly goes in the squared matrix element, and that is really quite important because it means that we are much more useful for the LHC. You can be a lot more flexible in what you can predict and measure because we don't have results for the inclusive cross-section. We have results for event by event. And because it's just a modified matrix element, you can sort of take that and put it into the standard LHC framework for fixed order calculations. And it's quite an important part of the description. I highlighted here where each of the things we've talked about actually fit in the equation. So the S bit here is exactly, that's the contraction of the currents, the sort of underlines outer skeleton. Each of these V's is exactly the V mu that I derived with the extra gluon emissions. This bit here is now a finite exponential, which is what you get when you combine the virtual and unresolved real pieces. And then all of this you put into your phase space, where this n here looks kind of unassuming, but is actually the number of final state particles that you're describing, and in practice goes to infinity. In principle, sorry, goes to infinity. In practice, we stop at 23 because we don't see any difference beyond that. Then we need to put back in some of the leading order parts because we missed some momentum configurations, for example. So the momentum configurations that are completely missing, we simply bolt on. That's what this sum does there. Non-FKL is just the name for those missing momentum configurations. The ones that we do have for, say, 3 and 4 partons where we've made the approximation with the vertices, we've fixed with multiplicative matching. We can go much further and derive other pieces. I won't do it in detail here, but to describe more processes, for example, W+Jets, you just need a new current, which pictorially is that. You can do an extra emission vertex for a Higgs boson, extra things for Z+Jets. I'll say a wee bit more about that later, as a recent paper with some different features. But the ideas are exactly the same as they are for the jets. You look at a simple process and derive the bits you need, and then it's like having a Lego box in front of you. You put the bits together that you need. So the final sort of principles and motivations are that the description we get should be exact for simple processes. For QCD, that means 2 to 2. It can also mean 2 to 2 plus x. We must be gauging invariant null phase space. We must be fast enough to actually be able to numerically integrate. We want to capture all the A coefficients. So our accuracy is leading logarithm in S over T. And then finally we patch that up with merging for 2 jets, 3 jets, and 4 jets. We stop there because that's where the matrix elements, tree-level matrix elements, become too large. It takes weeks to compile, never mind actually evaluate them. And so to match, there isn't a conceptual problem with matching to say 5 jet or more, but there's a practical numerical problem to doing it. And they have improved things a lot, so our next version of code, I think, will actually have 5 jet in it as default. And the final result is this completely exclusive event generator because we operate on the matrix element. It's currently available for all these processes at our website and just slots in with all these other sort of LHC tools. Good. So now that's what we've actually tried to do. So the thing then becomes, what have we learned from using it? What have we seen? Because when we did our very first papers in 2009, we didn't know if it was going to end up being a significant effect or not. We didn't have any LHC data at the time. I've only picked a couple of analyses. I deliberately picked analyses where they were fairly inclusive in the types of events that they selected. You know, there are some other ones which are really interesting, but they've really selected obscure corners of phase space. But for me, the real motivation is that this is a problem everywhere, and not just if you go looking for it. So this is the same analysis I showed before, but a different plot. W+Jets is really extensively studied as a standard model, standard candle, to validate lots of things about the LHC because it's deemed to be well understood, and also as preparation for Higgs plus jets because it's colour neutral heavy object plus jets, and so the jet radiation patterns are largely similar, also for Z+Jets. In this case, the x-axis is a fairly inclusive variable here. It's the angular difference between the 2 jets with largest transverse momentum. It has lots of interesting features, but all the different descriptions, the pink one is the one I was describing for you there, the high-energy jets, do pretty well. Probably the best is the pure NLO calculation, but there's not so much between them. The bands here and in the subsequent plots are the ones you get from scale variation, which is a prescription to give an estimate of a theory uncertainty. The main motivation for calculating at NLO is to reduce that, which is why their bands are relatively small. The high bands are enormous because they come from the matching. It comes from the leading order part there, and we are taking steps now towards going to next leading order accuracy, specifically to address that. These ones here don't show them because it was too costly to evaluate them. But if they had them, they would be the same as the high ones. They're also largely leading order in this case. But I'll show a little bit later to show you that actually it's not an error band. It's not like an experimental error band, that the central value could be anywhere in the middle. It's actually basically an overall normalization. And if we fixed one bin, then the rest would have no error on it. So that was an inclusive variable. If we now go back to this plot I showed at the beginning of the talk, where instead you measure the invariant mass of the two hardest jets, then you see where the problems begin. As you let the invariant mass of two jets become large, you allow these logs to become large. You can write the invariant mass of two particles for massless particles. You can parameterize them in terms of the transverse momentum, their rapidities and their angles, and you can show that the invariant mass between the two of them is this expression. So if this becomes large, it's either because the individual transverse momentum has become large, or because they're separated in rapidity. And that, because it's exponential, it becomes big very quickly. And this is what is included in the high energy limit. So large M12 is not exclusively large delta Y, but there is a strong correlation. And you can get the effect of the logs here. And that is exactly what we see in the data. As I saw before, that if you don't have the logs, none of the other lines do, then the descriptions just break down also in comparison to each other. And they also break down really quite low. This is, what, maybe 700 giga-electron volts, where any new physics particles are already excluded. And this part here is the scale of new physics that we're all desperate to probe and find discoveries in, and none of our traditional tools can actually describe it, which I find pretty horrifying, actually, that we are in this situation.
So you sorry to understand, just to clarify. So you're saying your high method is the only one that has done this log summation.
It's the only one that sums the large, exactly, and they suffer because of it at already quite small scales. Now, I would like to be able to stand here and say, well, we do a pretty good job of this, and we get that right, so you should throw out the 30 years of work that went into these and only use our code. But life is not that simple, and we all know life is not that simple. So in the interest of balance, if instead you look at a distribution where you have large evolution in transverse momentum, that is exactly what a partron shower has that we do not have in high energy jets. And indeed, our predictions start to sort of just don't do well at all. They're too low here, they're too high here. So in that case, what you need is a partron shower, and the most sophisticated partron shower description is that one, and it does an excellent job of describing the data. So in a sense, it's good that we can find a theory description that describes a distribution, but it's a mess. It is not well defined. You know, there are lots of other things, interesting quantities to look at, where it's not obvious which one of these is the relevant theory description. So it's very different in that sense to like a transverse momentum resummation, where you know you have a problem if the transverse momentum of a Z boson goes to 0. So below a certain value, you add the resummation. Here, it's not so clean cut, and really the only solution to this that I can see is to combine all these different descriptions, so that there is a tool which has evolution in transverse momentum, which has evolution in the rapidity logs, the high energy logs, and has the soft collinear stuff. And ideally next leading order accuracy too, to beat down the theory errors.
In some sense, decide process by process which of those can't you hide in this decision process, new physics
Yes, you could, which is also why I think it's something we shouldn't ignore. You know, that, I mean, imagine what would have happened. We're really the new kid on the block here. These other things have been developing for 30 years. So if you did the same analysis before we existed, and you plotted that and want to make some conclusion about something you don't understand at 1500 GeV, what can you say? Nothing. You know, that I actually think as a theoretical community is a disgrace. You know, this is not an exotic process that I produced. It's a basic process, it's basic cuts, and we can't do it. And if we want to get the best out of the LHC, we clearly need to do it. A few other examples. This is an inclusive 4-jet analysis, which I always like to include just because it's been done already at Run 1. I think it's brilliant that you can do interesting things with events with at least 4 jets, and it shows that the cross-section for these multi-jet events is not small. We actually slightly improved our high predictions here. We have some next to leading log components, and here is an HT distribution going all the way up to 3 TV, where we managed to stay relatively flat, which is very exciting for us. The other lines also do a pretty good job there. And this is the invariant mass of all 4 jets. So it's kind of the protonic centre of mass for each collision, all the way up to 7 TV in 8 TV data, which is stunning actually that they see this and can measure that. And again, the purple line, which is ours, stays pretty flat all the way out here. I wouldn't draw too many conclusions about these because they're having clear numerical issues by that point, rather than physics issues. So, I said we needed to combine what we've got. It's something we've actually been thinking about for a long time. And as I said at the start, you can use a parton shower for small invariant mass. You can use high for large invariant mass. And so what you want to do is meet in the middle and do both. And in 2011, we had our first attempt with Leif Lundblad and his parton shower Ariadne. It's not one of the mainstream showers. We're currently working with him actually to do high plus Pythia, which will, for many reasons, actually be better than this. The picture here is that the hard wide angle emissions are the blue ones, so you would use high to describe that. The shower would add some sort of soft things. The length of the arrow is supposed to represent transverse momentum here, or collinear splittings. The problem in doing it is that we both have soft wide angle emissions in our description. And so we had to remove that overlap. And it was almost entire, actually, the overlap of the soft wide angle. And the collinear, there was almost no overlap at all, because it's simply not there in our matrix elements. We have used this in a couple of analyses, and I think it's sort of quite nice to see the different effects here. So this is another Atlas analysis from 2014. The x-axis in both of these plots is this PT bar, which is the average momentum of the 2 hardest jets in your event. It's a slightly strange variable. It's not my favourite variable because you can hide very different looking things at the same value, but that's what they did. They also had some extra rapidity cuts. And in this one, they're looking again at the average number of jets in the rapidity interval, so it's extra jets between these ones. And you can see the steep increase also with PT. The green line is what you would have got from a pure high prediction. The orange line is what you get from high plus Ariadne, showing there is a very high level of sensitivity here to parton shower effects. The difference in these lines is large. And Powheg is a next to leading order plus parton shower carriage. And in this case, you kind of see that as long as you've got the parton shower, then you do a reasonable job of describing the data. This was a very painful statistical problem we had. So don't worry with those bins. In this plot here, though, same analysis, but a slightly different variable. The y-axis is the average of the cosine of pi minus the angle. What it means is, if you have a 2 to 2 leading order process, your jets have to be back-to-back for momentum conservation, and this quantity will be 1. Anything else represents a deviation in balance, and so it's a sort of inclusive way of measuring extra jet activity, even if it's not, if it's 19 GeV instead of 20, so you don't count it as a jet, it still upsets the balance of your jets. If you do that, then again there's a big difference when you include parton shower effects. But if you have just the next to leading order in parton shower, you actually can't describe the data here at all. And so you need everything. And that is what's contained in our orange line there. And again, this is just at 7 TV. So already in run 2, this problem is and will be bigger. Right. We don't have so much time, so I'll zip through just a couple of the theory developments that we've been trying to do recently. I mentioned Z and virtual photon plus jets. Given that we've had W plus jets for a long time, it's not obvious why Z plus jets really is anything different, but the difference stems from interference effects. If you have your sort of skeleton QCD process looking like this, with Z plus jets, if these are both quarks, you have a choice of which quark line you emit off. You can do this for certain channels in W plus jets too, but there's a flavour and a kinematic suppression in W+Jets. Neither of them are there for Z+Jets, and the interference between the two is quite large. You can see here the difference. This is another slice through phase space. That's the full matrix element, and this pink line here is what you get if you ignore the interference. So at these values it can be quite significant. We're only able to actually describe it because we build starting at amplitude level. So if you get both bits in your amplitude, automatically when you do mod square, you're going to get the interference. Most other high energy descriptions operate at matrix element squared, so you can't do it. An alternative to viewing this is to view it as a QCD process with electroweak radiation. And there are some electroweak showers, but they also explicitly don't have interference. So they can't describe the effect of these parts here. We have some data. Unfortunately, it's sort of older than the W+Jets data, so it doesn't go out to such high energies, but we still give a pretty good description across the board here in that process. And that's only half the ranges we actually had for W+Jets. I said I would mention the bars, and so this is the same plot that was on the previous slide, but the right-hand side here is normalised. So both the data and our prediction is normalised to total cross-section, and the agreement obviously doesn't change very much because we had the cross-section pretty good here. So we're dividing both lines by the same number. But the bands have almost completely disappeared at low values anyway. And that's why it is correct to assign significance to the agreement of your central values with the line. That's what I meant earlier about it being a pure normalisation. If you fix the overall level, then there isn't a degree of freedom left. It's one parameter, not a parameter per bin. The other theory development I touched on the way through was some next to leading log contributions. We are a long way off having next to leading logarithmic accuracy. It would be sort of the B terms in that expansion. But what we can do is include different momentum configurations. The first thing we did, and this is what went into the 4-jet predictions, was to have one gluon emitted outside of your quark line. Now, if I drew that in the sort of skeleton picture I had before, then it means inserting a quark instead of a gluon, so it's formally 1 power down in S. It's formally next to leading log. But the reason we do it is because it's suddenly a momentum configuration that we can apply resummation to. We can apply resummation between the quark and down here, in that part, and take it out of the non-FKL matched bit that we just bolted on as an extra sum. So we're controlling it much better. Although we have the extra emissions and we have the logs that go with them, instead of just a very crude sort of summing. And so in terms of reducing our dependence on matching, which also reduces our scale variation, then it's important in that sense. And that example showed that we get still having these helped us get a good description of large HT, and there's various other processes that have been done by various graduate students, both of mine and of Jeppe Andersen's, and we consistently see an improvement in our description of data at large momentum. It doesn't repair the full evolution in transverse momentum, but it gives us the first log, and so it helps, as we see.
Just one thing, it gives you the first log in the sense that you are sure that you will be able to capture all the first logs, or improving on this B coefficient every time a bit more.
Yeah, it doesn't give you all of the B coefficients. It just gives you at this kind of alpha S cubed level, you get a log that you would get from evolving in PT, because you have a process that wasn't there before. So I can't claim a given logarithmic accuracy in the Partron shower logs. It doesn't give me that, but it just gives me a bit more of what was missing.
It could capture a good part of it.
Exactly. And it's not just sort of cherry picking a next to leading log part for the sake of cherry picking a next to leading log part. One way you can think of it is that for this process, defined for a given initial and final state, It is the leading logarithmic description of that process, because it doesn't have an alpha s to the n alpha s to the n minus 2 term. It's absent. And so it starts at alpha s to the n alpha s to the n minus 3, and that we have. And similarly for these processes here, which enter different orders. Right, I'll stop there. I hope I've given you a sense of the problem that high energy brings us, although, of course, it is a good problem to have because it means we are accessing energies we've never accessed before. It's a problem we also can't ignore, that it is damaging our perturbative expansion and something we have to deal with. Already at 7 TeV you could see it. In fact, there was an analysis recently of Tevatron data, going back to the W+Jet data, and if you look at rapidity separations there, you also see the same effect already there. And it will only enhance as we go to higher and higher S, as a community we must, if we're serious about searching for new physics, then we have to include this consistent description in our theory descriptions. One flexible solution to this comes through the high energy jets framework. It's the only one to have the logs in a flexible Monte Carlo, which makes it much more useful and applicable for LHC. But unfortunately, I can't retire just yet. There's a lot of work to be done to build a full picture with a Barton shower, more processes, unordered emissions, and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any question?
Can I just, because you said at the beginning that you're massively referring onto all massless.
Yes.
And that's going to induce collinear structures to do with that as well. You know, you're going to get collinear logs when you're emitting the blue off that line. It's collinear with it. But they're kind of artificial because there is a mess.
Yeah, you know, the collinear problem is a sort of interesting one. If you have a genuinely collinear emission, which you can describe extremely well if you use a Barton shower, then typically you will see it within a jet. So actually the momentum of that jet will be the momentum as if there hadn't been the collinear splitting if you add the momentum of the two together. And that is what we can describe very well. So if you look at the level of actual jets with a reasonable cone size, then you don't see that at all. And it's only if you wanted to do something clever with jet substructure or something, you would see that you know, jet substructure for us is a delta function. We have a hard part on and nothing else. And we really are unable to describe the substructure that we get from it. But the matrix elements, if you look at the actual equations, if you allow two of your momenta to become collinear, they don't diverge, because it's explicitly sort of removed from the phase space, and it's consistent with applying your jet algorithms to it.
Does that mean there's no motivation for putting masses in for the massive fields?
There's motivation in the sense that there is known to be a problem in describing TT bar plus jets. So that's why I have a master's student looking at that just now, and because they see large ratios between TT bar plus 3 jets and 4 jets, they see at large invariant masses a problem in the current theory descriptions diverging, very like that other description, and they have no way to really address it. Our problem with addressing it is in actually building the diagrams. The easiest way to do it is to sort of build a new piece at the top. This is TT bar, basically, a sort of effective blob here, and then treat everything else as if it's the same. But that's only a subset of your TT bar plus jets events, you know, where the two most forward things here are the TT bar, and then there's all these extra ones at increasing separations and rapidities. So it's a first step, but it's not actually going to fully solve the problem. What you would want to do, you know, if you start a leading order TT bar process like this one, you want to apply the resummation actually there, to that quark. And doing that within our framework at the moment, allowing for that to be massive, I don't know how to do it at the moment.
Okay. Any other question, please?
I'm still trying to understand the achievement, which maybe because you've been too modest and also because I'm ignorant. I seem to remember these leading log resumations of many years ago. This has been done by BFKL and those guys. So are you saying that this is the first time this is applied in this jet physics context?
No, they also applied it in the jet physics context, but they did it on inclusive cross-sections, where you have sort of infinite acceptance of everything. And
so not on the amplitude level.
Exactly.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And then there was a sort of big effort by people like Vittorio Del Duca in the kind of early 2000s, where he did everything at the matrix element squared out. But what he threw away much more than we did. And he kind of stopped short. He never put it in a Monte Carlo. He stopped short and sort of said, "Oh, here's the matrix element and how you would describe W plus jets, say, W plus N jets." But his approach was to take the amplitude, make as many approximations as he could, and give you your final answer, which was leading log correct, but was in many cases quite far from the actual answer. And we had the sort of opposite approach. It was entirely inspired by that. My collaborator, Jeppe Andersen, collaborated with Vittorio in some of those papers. But our approach was, instead of making as many approximations as you can, to make as few approximations as you can, but with the only requirement that you remain numerically fast enough. And there's always a slight price to pay in accuracy to get something you can evaluate. But we tried to keep as much of the underlying process as we could, because we wanted to give a better description away from the strict limit.
Any other question? If not, let's thank Jenny again.